Welcome to Ner L'Reglai Jewish Ministries, where we teach the Bible from a Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. Today we'll be continuing with the book of Daniel, chapter 4, and this is part 3, the King of Heaven. We've been looking at Daniel chapter 4 for the last couple of teachings, and we read there about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which is his second dream, this great tree which he sees, which represents his own life, which really encapsulates or covers the world. It's a very fruitful, green, flourishing tree. It's ordered to be cut down until he recognizes the King of Heaven. And we saw how God sent his Holy One to wake up Nebuchadnezzar, to alert him to this dream, and how we are reminded that all of mankind is to be awakened to who God is. And in last week's teaching, in part 2, we focused on the testimony of Nebuchadnezzar and really saw how Nebuchadnezzar himself, right, is responsible for what is written in Daniel chapter 4. He said he wanted all the peoples and nations of every tongue to know who this God is. So Daniel chapter 4 is really the testimony of this Gentile king who came to fear the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this week's teaching in part 3 will be focusing on the King of Heaven, Melech Shemaiah, in Aramaic. So as we get started in this last segment of Daniel chapter 4, we're going to be looking a little bit into the subject of Babylon the Great. And we saw last week that King Nebuchadnezzar, before he was disciplined by the Lord for those 7 periods of time to live like an animal, he was boasting to himself of this magnificent city, this magnificent empire that he had built. And we read in Daniel chapter 4, verse 30, the king reflected and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" Now, in this great boast, Nebuchadnezzar is claiming to be a great builder. So what did he build? Was Babylon truly great? So we'll be focusing the first half of this teaching on the greatness of Babylon, the rise of this ancient city, and just really get a glimpse into how it was really laid out and some of the magnificent parts of this kingdom. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at a lot of different quotes and archaeological research and information that is available to us today. But as we're going through this week's teaching, I want us to be thinking about this question of how are we building our lives, right? How are you building your life? There's a well-known saying, life is a work in progress. It's like a building that's going up, right? We're constantly adding until the building is complete. And all throughout our life, we're always making decisions and investing our time and energy in certain things to have the complete picture. And our complete picture is only really complete when we depart from these earthly bodies, right? But life is a work in progress. And how are you building your life? So I want us to be thinking about that question as we go through today's teaching. And we're going to be seeing how Nebuchadnezzar built his life, which a lot of it is seen through the city of Babylon. We're going to look at some of his building accomplishments. So here's a quote from the BBC website, which gives us a little bit of information about the city of Babylon. It says, located between the Tigris and Euphrates in what today is Iraq, Babylon was largely rebuilt by its king, Nebuchadnezzar II, in the 6th century BC, using vibrant glazed bricks in blues, reds, and yellows. Ancient texts from Herodotus to the Old Testament describe its overwhelmingly opulent temples, shrines, and palaces. At its peak, with more than 200,000 inhabitants, it was the largest metropolis in the world. So we've looked at some maps in the past, but just again to understand where ancient Babylon is in reference to this country, which today we call Iraq, right? And so here we see the modern borders of Iraq surrounded by its countries, by other countries. We see Baghdad in the middle of the map, with Babylon about 50 miles or 80 kilometers south of Baghdad, right? So ancient Babylon is located there just south of Baghdad. It's located in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, but it's right on the Euphrates River. And so we can see where Babylon is located in these various maps. And so literally, Babylon was built adjacent to the Euphrates River. Actually, the city stretched to both sides of the river. And in this picture, we see a kind of a famous structure that we often see in pictures of Babylon, right? So what is this structure in the middle of the city? It is called Etemenanki, a ziggurat with a temple to Marduk on top. And it's a famous ziggurat. We're going to be talking a little bit about this Etemenanki ziggurat, right? So first of all, we see in this picture the actual ruins, the foundation of this ziggurat in Babylon, in ancient Babylon. And it's called Etemenanki, and it means house of the platform of heaven and earth, or temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. They're both saying the same thing, right? Some kind of religious house or temple on its foundation between heaven and earth. So what is a ziggurat? A ziggurat is a pyramidal step temple tower that is an architectural and religious structure characteristic of the major cities of Mesopotamia, now mainly in Iraq, from approximately 2200 until 500 BCE. The ziggurat was always built with a core of mud brick and an exterior covered with baked brick. So that's just a textbook explanation of what a ziggurat is. We see an example of one here of how they looked. There are several of these still in Iraq today, whether they are partial or reconstructed. So there are many scholars and archaeologists who believe that the Etemenanki ziggurat marks the place of the original Tower of Babel, which we read about in Genesis 11. We'll be looking more into that. There are many details of this stepped ziggurat, many details of this stepped ziggurat are based on archaeological findings, as well as an ancient tablet called the Isagila tablet. So we're going to be looking at this certain Isagila tablet, which explains more about this particular ziggurat, the Etemenanki ziggurat. So here is a picture of the Isagila tablet. And this is actually, this picture and the text here is from the website of the Louvre Museum in France. And we read a little bit about the tablet here. It says the Isagila tablet is a Neo-Babylonian mathematical text that has come down to us in the form of a later copy made at Uruk, Mesopotamia in 229 BC. And it mentions it being a mathematical text in that it literally has the dimensions of the Etemenanki ziggurat, which we'll see in a little bit here. So continuing on with this Isagila tablet, the text copied from an earlier document describes the temple of the god Marduk in Babylon as reconstructed by the kings of the Babylonian dynasty of Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar II. This temple was called Isagila, the temple that raises its head. So this Isagila tablet obviously talks about Isagila, the certain temple, but it also talks about the Etemenanki ziggurat, which we see here. The text first gives a double description of the base of the multi-tiered tower built inside the city walls or ziggurat, then describes the main temple, and finally gives the measurements of the multi-tiered tower called Etemenanki, house of the foundation of heaven and earth, which they say here, the Tower of Babel in the Bible, right? So literally in this explanation in the Louvre Museum, they are attributing it to the Tower of Babel. It could be. So here we see a temple, which is a, an artist's imagination of how it did look. We know what the base looks like, but how exactly it looked based on several descriptions, it was some kind of multi-tiered step temple. Here again, another artist's depiction of what it may have looked like. This tower seems to have had 7 stories, built in the form of terraces, and was surmounted by a temple. German excavations have confirmed the dimensions of the square base, over 91 meters along each side, right? So basically you have a square base, each side 91 meters, or each side 300 feet, right? So, and here's a good depiction of what it may have looked like again. So on the very top, you have a small temple. They have also shown that 3 large stairways resting on the south facade provided access to the first story higher than the others and to the second story. Smaller staircases led to the top, probably situated at a height of 90 meters. So they believe that the height was equal to its width, about 90 meters or 300 feet tall. It's pretty tall for something 2,600 years ago. The towering ziggurat, which housed the temple to Marduk, was sure to have been a building that Nebuchadnezzar took pride in, even if he just maintained and updated it. So more than likely, he inherited this temple that was already there and probably just updated it. This is just one example of Babylon the Great, and we see here kind of the cities surrounding this ziggurat. It was definitely the centerpiece that gained a lot of attention because of its height. You could see it's anywhere in this flat land. Now we go on with understanding more about Babylon the Great. There are literally thousands of bricks stamped with Nebuchadnezzar's name that have been found by archaeologists in the ruins of ancient Babylon. As we read here in this text, King Nebuchadnezzar II rebuilt the city of Babylon on a grand scale. As many as 15 million bricks were used to make palaces, temples, and grand city walls. Here is an example of one of those stamped bricks. It says here, a stamped baked mud brick with cuneiform writing. And this is actually the translation of what's written on this brick. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, who cares for Isagila and Izida, eldest son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon. So literally thousands of these bricks were found. And there was over 15 million bricks believed to be made to build just the official buildings that Nebuchadnezzar built. Here is a quote from a Bible scholar, Dr. Showers, describing Babylon. He says, Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt the old palace of his father, then built 2 more palaces. He built 17 religious temples in Babylon and its suburb, Borsippa. He completed the 2 great walls that surrounded the city. The outer wall was wide enough for chariots to pass each other on its top. The king installed great fortifications to protect the city and had canals dug from one end of the city to another to facilitate commerce. Again, here's just a picture of what it may have looked like with the ziggurat, with the river running through it, and the great walls that Nebuchadnezzar built. And here's another quote from Dr. Showers. One of Nebuchadnezzar's most splendid projects was the magnificent Ishtar Gate. This was a double gateway through the walls of the city. The walls of this gate were covered with bulls and 4-legged dragons in high relief. The approach to the gate was between strong fortress walls on which were rows of lions in relief and covered with brightly colored tiles. So here is a picture of the Ishtar Gate. We're going to be looking at this in more detail. It's a very famous archaeological find. It's very famous in history as well. And this blue gate of the city here that has a street that leads up to it. And then as you go through the gate, it continues on to the Etemananki ziggurat at the top, in the top center of the screen. So here's another picture of the gate. It has been called one of the seven wonders of the world. And just to say that this is actually a reconstruction of the gate. Parts of it are actually the original gate. We're going to be talking about that. The Ishtar Gate was excavated in Iraq between 1899 and 1917 by a German archaeological team led by Robert Koldewey. Here's a picture of this famous German archaeologist. Here is just a picture of the revealed walls that were unearthed, digging out the sand, taken back in the 1920s. And you can actually see some of the reliefs of animals on the wall if you look closely. Parts of that Ishtar Gate have been relocated to Germany, restored and preserved in the Pergamon Museum. So if any of you live in Germany or have visited Germany and have an opportunity to visit, this is an amazing site to visit. So literally they took parts of the Ishtar Gate that they found and they brought them to Germany, and they are established here in this museum. And so what we're seeing in this picture is parts of this gate, and then they restored it as well, as much as they could, to give the full image of what this Ishtar Gate looked like. So obviously very brilliant and very well ornate with blue and gold and yellow. More explanation of the Ishtar Gate. King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered the construction of the gate and dedicated it to the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. The gate was constructed using glazed brick with alternating rows of bas relief Mushusu dragons, uruks, which are bulls, and lions, symbolizing the gods Marduk, Adad, Ishtar, respectively. The gate, being part of the walls of Babylon, was considered one of the original seven wonders of the world. So here again is just a photo of parts of the Ishtar Gate. This is actually a photo that was taken in Istanbul at the Archaeology Museum there. I actually took this photo myself. As you can look on the top, you have the Mushusu, the dragon, and on the left you see a reproduction. On the right you see an original, and you can see the originals that are basically rectangular in shape, and you can see they're a bit more worn, right? And so, so the top right is the original. The bottom two oryx, the bulls, are original as well, and you can see the reconstructed wall that they've tried to make it look natural. But we see the originals there. So one natural question is, why do they have these reliefs in the Istanbul Museum if it was the German archaeological team who found them and brought them back to Germany? And I'll answer that question in a minute. Again, here we see a relief of a lion, and we see the original relief that was made in Nebuchadnezzar's day. And then you see the reconstructed wall that gives it a background. And this is the lion, the goddess, represented by the goddess Ishtar. So Germany was excavating. This is back in the Ottoman Empire days, right? So the Turkish Ottoman Empire was ruling in Iraq at that time. And in order to get permission to take the Ishtar Gate to Germany, they needed to give the Ottoman Empire something to get permission. And so the deal was made, and the Ottoman Empire at that time, which is now the Republic of Turkey, is in possession of these various reliefs. And I'm not sure what else is in the museum there that they got, but deals have to be made, right? So that's why Istanbul, the Archaeology Museum at Istanbul, has these certain reliefs from Babylon. So another great find at ancient Babylon is the inscription of the Ishtar Gate. So this inscription is in cuneiform script and is displayed at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, along with all the other wonderful treasures there. Now, this is actually a text, right? So think of if you go to a museum, wherever, you always have a little plaque, a little description board, right, that explains what you're looking at. And so that's what Nebuchadnezzar did 2,600 years ago. He made an inscription to explain why he built the Ishtar Gate the way he did. And we're going to give you a close-up view here to see actually what's written there. So this is actually a close-up look at the cuneiform script of the Ishtar Gate. And we're going to read the translation of this cuneiform script. But before we do, we're just going to review some of the terminology. So hopefully it will flow a little more smooth. Again, we've already looked at the dragon, but the dragon represents the god Marduk, the protector god of Babylon. They say produced, his name is to be pronounced Marutuk, and means immortal son of Utu, or bull calf of the sun god Utu, right? So these are all representing pagan gods. It's good to understand these things. This is again, the line, which is Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, and the Uruk, or the bull, representing the god of Adad, or Ishkur. So here's some other vocabulary here. We've seen this word several times already. The Isagila was a temple dedicated to Marduk, the protector god of Babylon, and it lay south of the Ziggurat Etemenanki. Izida is a chapel located inside the temple Isagila, which was dedicated to Nabu. And Nabu, which we've looked at earlier, is a Babylonian god, right? And that's where Nebuchadnezzar gets his name, Nebuchadnezzar, right? So Nabu is Akkadian and means to announce or to prophesy. Nabu is considered the god of literacy and vegetation. Borsippa is a city in southern Iraq, also known as Birs Nimrud, or having been identified with Nimrod. In this city is a ziggurat erected in honor of the local god Nabu, called the son of Babylon's Marduk, right? So Marduk was considered the father god and originally had preeminence as the greatest god. Nabu is considered the son of Marduk, and he became popular during the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Nabu was considered chief of the gods during the 6th century BCE, when Nebuchadnezzar was reigning, which makes sense, right? He had this god in his name, Nebuchadnezzar. And so interestingly, this god became the chief god in Nebuchadnezzar's time. And he was known as the god who knows all and sees all. So the inscription of the Ishtar Gate is written in Akkadian cuneiform, and here it's in white gold and blue glazed bricks, and was a dedication by Nebuchadnezzar to explain the gate's purpose, right? So this is a big explanation of Nebuchadnezzar and why he built this gate. So here is the translation in 1 second. First of all, the dimensions of the gate. The inscription is 15 meters tall, so 45 feet, depending on how you read these things. 45 feet tall, 15 meters, 10 meters wide, or 30 feet wide, and includes 60 lines of writing. The inscription was created around the same time as the gate's construction, and they give the years 605 to 562 because that's the years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Many place its construction at about 575 BCE. So here is the translation of the Ishtar Gate inscription. Now, we've actually read parts of the Ishtar Gate inscription as it related to the text in the book of Daniel. Now we'll just read the full text. This is the translation of the text. It says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the pious prince, appointed by the will of Marduk, the highest priestly prince, beloved of Nabu, of prudent deliberation, who has learned to embrace wisdom, who fathomed their, meaning Marduk and Nabu, godly being, and pays reverence to their majesty, the untiring governor, who always has at heart the care of the cult of Isagila and Izida, and is constantly concerned with the well-being of Babylon and Borsippa, the wise, the humble, the caretaker of Isagila and Izida, the firstborn son of Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, am I. So this whole first section is explaining who Nebuchadnezzar is in relation to his father and his God. Obviously not too humble of a man. He spoke very highly of himself. Going on, both gate entrances of the city walls Ingor Elil and Nemeti Elil, following the filling of the street from Babylon, had become increasingly lower. Therefore, I pulled down these gates and laid their foundations at the water table with asphalt and bricks, and had them made of bricks with blue stone, on which wonderful bulls and dragons were depicted. I covered their roofs by laying majestic cedars lengthwise over them. I fixed doors of cedar wood adorned with bronze at all the gate openings. I placed wild bulls and ferocious dragons in the gateways, and thus adorned them with luxurious splendor, so that mankind might gaze on them in wonder. I let the temple of Siskur, the highest festival house of Marduk, the Lord of the gods, a place of joy and jubilation for the major and minor deities, be built firm like a mountain in the precinct of Babylon of asphalt and fired bricks. Okay, so that is the full reading of the Ishtar Gate inscription. As I write here, it is an archaeological jewel with all the information. It's also so well preserved for us today. And it really answers the question of who, what, how, why, when. Nebuchadnezzar describes who he is in reference to his gods and his father. It describes the construction of the city gate with doors and ceilings, along with various temples. It describes the materials as well as the asphalt and fired bricks. He describes why the bulls and dragons were added, that mankind might gaze on them in wonder. And we know that it was built in the time of Nebuchadnezzar's ruling as king in Babylon. So just a tremendous archaeological find, and with so much information with the Ishtar Gate inscription. So the reconstruction of the Ishtar Gate provides a glimpse into the grandeur, right, of the original. We see just a piece of how really magnificent Babylon must have been 2,600 years ago. The Ishtar Gate was one of the 8 gates of the city of Babylon. As we read here, the Ishtar Gate was constructed as the final gate in the city of Babylon and was associated with the gods and cosmology of the Babylonian culture. The road before and after the Ishtar Gate was known as the Road of the Gods, or the Processional Way, and was where the annual New Year's party was celebrated every year. So again, we saw this picture earlier, but now we're looking more at the street, right? The road, the processional way that goes into, leading from the bottom of the screen to the Ishtar Gate, and then continuing all the way to the ziggurat there, right? So this is called the processional way, and they literally know where that street is in ancient Babylon. You see the original stone tiles there in the street, and then it's surrounded by a reconstruction of what the walls look like in that time. So it's amazing to be able to still see parts of the city unearthed. Now, the processional way, the street, was decorated in a similar manner to the Ishtar Gate with these beautiful colored tiles, especially with the relief of the lion. It is estimated that 120 lions decorated the walls of the processional way, which stretched a half mile from the Ishtar Gate to the Temple of Marduk. So again, this is a glimpse into ancient Babylon, and we can see that Nebuchadnezzar was truly a great builder. We see the greatness, the magnificence of Babylon, even just from the archaeological finds that we see today. It is estimated that 15 million baked bricks were used in construction of the official buildings in Babylon during his reign, not including the private homes, right? This is just the official buildings that Nebuchadnezzar built. Again, many of the bricks bore the name of the king with a cuneiform inscription, generally stamped into the clay, but some were handwritten, right? All bearing the name of the king, as we saw earlier, with this type of inscription on each brick. When Nebuchadnezzar asked the question to himself back in Daniel 4:30, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built, as a royal residence by the might of my power and the glory of my majesty. He was basically saying, is this not the magnificent city that bears my name? And the answer was yes. It did truly and literally bear his name, but he forgot the source of his power and majesty. We also see the braggadocious language, right, used by the king in the first person. It was all about, he says, which I myself have built, by the might. In the Aramaic, it's tekof, of my power, Chassan, and the glory, Yakar, of my majesty, Hadar. So we see all of these very braggadocious words and just pointing to himself. It was all about Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. He took all of the credit for his success while ignoring the Most High God. Nebuchadnezzar illustrates well the mentality of humanism, life based on human accomplishments without recognizing God. King Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom are a picture of creation, defying the creator, in building Babylon and exalting its gods. Now, where do we see a similar scenario in history of a people who build a city in their own strength, in their own name, and in defiance of the Creator God? Hopefully we all have the correct answer in mind. It was the original Babylon, right? Which we usually call Babel. At first mentioned in Genesis 10:10, and then described in Genesis 11. As we read in verses 1 and 2, now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So Babylon in the land of Shinar represents defiance against the God of heaven. The people of the first Babylon, Babel, made their city to endure forever. We read in verse 3, they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. Now Nebuchadnezzar used the same method for building his city of Babylon. Regarding the building of the temple to Marduk, Nebuchadnezzar wrote the following in the Ishtar Gate inscription, which we just read. Let the temple be built firm like a mountain in the precincts of Babylon of asphalt and fired bricks. So fired bricks and asphalt or tar, the same thing, were the method of building a lasting structure. Now, the goal of the people of the original Babylon is clearly stated in the Bible in verse 4 here, Genesis 11:4. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So their goal was clearly stated, a city to reach heaven, make a name for themselves, and to remain together. They did not want to go and scatter all over the world. And then God judged the people at Babel in Genesis 11:8-9. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. So again, we see the name Babel, is first used here, and this is what we also call Babylon, right? So Babylon actually comes from the Greek and Latin understanding of the word, but as I mentioned previously, in the Hebrew, right, we only see Bavel. It's not for Babel in Genesis 11 and Babylon in the book of Daniel. It's the same word, and we know it's the same general location, and more than likely the ziggurat that we see in ancient Babylon was more than likely the place of the tower that the people at Babel first tried to build. So now, why did God judge the people at Babel? They failed to keep God's original law, right? What did God say to Adam and Eve after he created them? In Genesis 1:28, it says God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth, right? So fill the earth. Genesis 9:1, after the flood, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so the idea is to spread out in the earth. Instead of filling the earth, the people of Babel, right, the people who went to the land of Shinar, which is called Babel, united in one city in the land of Shinar in defiance of God's command. They did not want to continue to spread out. They wanted to stay. They tried to build a tower with its top reaching to heaven rather than honoring the God of heaven. They tried to make a name for themselves instead of worshiping the one name, the God of heaven and earth. So following in the steps of the original Babel or Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar was walking in a similar state of rebellion against God. He tried to build a lasting city with fired bricks and asphalt. Bricks were stamped with Nebuchadnezzar's name. He built the city of Babylon in defiance of the God of heaven. He ignored the King of heaven. Babylon represents global opposition to God, resisting his authority and rejecting his true place as king of the universe. This is why Babylon is the theme of Revelation chapters 17 and 18. Babylon symbolically represents an affront to God's rule and his reign on the earth. The spirit of Babylon is more consumed with making a name for itself rather than worshiping the name above all names. Now, Babylon was truly great. However, Nebuchadnezzar credited the greatness of the kingdom of Babylon to his own strength, for his own glory, and for his own name, right? And as we've read many times already, this verse, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? His pride was obvious. So we need to always reflect, right? What about you and what about me? Are we able to see and admit our own pride? One does not need to be a king to be proud. It may be a business that is successful. It may be a ministry that one leads and is blessed. It may be a family that grows and is fruitful. Do we take credit for the success in any of these areas of life, or do we give all the glory to God? Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. God had informed the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, through Daniel, that his power as king comes from the God of heaven. As we saw earlier in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel had explained to the king the meaning of his first dream, he says, "You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the honor. And wherever the sons of mankind live, or the animals of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has handed them over to you and has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold." Now, Nebuchadnezzar failed to grasp the extent to which his power was granted by a greater authority, the God of heaven. Nebuchadnezzar's pride was on a national scale as he was king of his empire. Nebuchadnezzar represents all of the kingdoms of this world, which strive to elevate the kingdoms of men above or in defiance to the kingdom of God. Pride is not confined to secular leaders. Pride can take root in any one of us at any point along the journey of life. We need to remember the warning that God gave to the Israelites as they were becoming the nation and people of God, as they wandered in the wilderness before they entered the promised land. And I want to just take a minute and just to read a section of Daniel chapter 8, which is a great just warning about how pride can easily enter into our life when things start going well. And it says this in Daniel chapter 8, starting in verse 11. "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply and your silver and gold multiply and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the lands of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness, he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you to do good for you in the end. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand have made this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, which he swore to your fathers. As it is this day, it shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. This warning is not only to the nation of Israel, it's to all of us. We all need to learn to cling to the Lord, worship him alone, and constantly give thanks, remembering that everything that we possess is because of his provision and the strength that he gives to us, right? We need to remember that pride comes before the fall. Pride separates us from God and tells us that we can do it on our own. The only cure is a repentant spirit that is broken and worships the God of heaven. Thankfully, Nebuchadnezzar repented and worshiped God. And now let's finish the end of Daniel chapter 4. But at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth. And no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what have you done? At that time, my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. And my counselors and my nobles began seeking me out. So I was reestablished in my sovereignty, and surpassing greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are true, and his ways just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. So Nebuchadnezzar glorified the King of heaven. That is the conclusion of Daniel chapter 4. It's a beautiful conclusion. I just want to end here with the understanding of the word heavens, or heaven or heavens, right? The Aramaic word for heaven is shemayim, or in the plural, shemaya, and means sky, heavens, or the realm above us, right? It's equivalent to the Hebrew word shemayim, the heavens. The Aramaic word shemayim is found in the scriptures in the Old Testament, right? So the Aramaic word appears for a total of 35 times in the Old Testament. In the book of Daniel, it appears 27 times. And just in Daniel chapter 4, it appears 15 times, right? So almost half the occurrences of this word, shemayim, heavens, is in Daniel chapter 4. Obviously, a central theme in Daniel chapter 4 is that the Most High God is the ruler of the heavens. And as we saw in this verse, Nebuchadnezzar said, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, right? So just those highlighted words, praise, exalt, and honor, it's meshabach, meromem, and mehadar. It's a beautiful expression of praise. The word praise in this verse is the Aramaic word shebach, and means to praise, to loud, to adore. It's identical in Hebrew. I give you an example here, Psalm 63:3 or 4, depending on your version. Because your loving kindness is better than life, my lips will praise you. In the book of Daniel, this word shebach is only used 5 times. It's used once in Daniel 2, which we'll read in a second, twice in Daniel 4, which is both of Nebuchadnezzar when he praises God, which we just read, and then twice in Daniel 5. Now, Daniel used this word shebach after God revealed to him the first dream of Nebuchadnezzar, as well as the interpretation, right? And Daniel said, to you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, and so forth. So we see how Daniel praised God with this word shebach. And then Nebuchadnezzar uses the same word shebach twice in Daniel 4, which we already read. And this word shebach is used to describe how Belshazzar and his party, right, his party of 1,000 people, we'll see more of that in the next teaching of Daniel 5, praise the gods of various materials, right? Daniel 5:4, they, referring to Belshazzar and his friends, they drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And we must remember, my friends, if one does not praise and worship the God of heaven, one will worship someone or something else. That's just the way life is. So again, we ask ourselves the question, who or what do you worship? Who are you using? How are you using your time and energy? How are you building your life? Nebuchadnezzar went from building Babylon the Great to praising the King of Heaven. How one builds a life is evidenced by how one lives a life day to day. How are you building your life? How are we investing our time and our energy? Is it in building our kingdom or building his kingdom and worshiping the King? So we see how in Daniel 4, at the end, the dream was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar stopped building Babylon and started praising the King of Heaven, Melech Shemaiah. So this is the end of the teachings of Daniel chapter 4. For next time, please read Daniel chapter 5. And again, thank you for joining us at Ner LaRegli. If you're enjoying these teachings, please partner with us and give any donation that you can by clicking the Give tab. Thank you, and see you again next time.